Picture the most beautiful building human beings have ever constructed. 700 rooms, 2,000 windows, a hall lined with 357 mirrors, each one worth more than a farm. Gardens so vast that the fountains cannot all run at once because there is not enough water in this part of France to feed them. Now fill that building with the smell of urine. Fill the staircases with men relieving themselves against the marble because there is nowhere else to go. Fill the corridors with rotting food, with dogs, with 10,000 human bodies that have not been properly washed in weeks because bathing is considered dangerous and slightly immoral. Add smallpox. Add lice so ordinary that ladies carry little ivory scratching rods down the backs of their wigs. Add a king who is dying in a gilded bed while the most powerful people in Europe stand around him, holding perfumed handkerchiefs to their faces and calculating what his death will be worth to them. That's Versailles, the glory of France and the filthiest great house in Europe, a place where a duchess could kneel before God in the royal chapel in the morning and step over a servant sleeping in his own vomit on the back stairs that same evening, and notice neither one. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists filing through the hall of mirrors with a guidebook. We're going in through the other doors, the narrow ones, the ones cut into the panelling so cleverly that the courtiers walking past never even see them. We're going to live one life inside those walls. Everything that person saw, smelled, carried, scrubbed, and swore on his soul never to repeat. Because that's the thing about Versailles that the paintings never show you. For every duke in silk, there were 10 servants in blue wool, and the servants saw everything. They emptied the chamber pots of queens. They changed the sheets after adulteries that could have toppled governments. They carried the dying and washed the dead. And then they went down to their attics under the lead roofs, and they kept their mouths shut, and most of them carried what they knew into graves that nobody ever marked. So I make these history stories, and honestly I still have no idea whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just quietly fascinated by the fact that the most magnificent palace on earth had no toilets, and smelled like a stable in August. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Pull the blanket up. Here we go. The first thing you need to understand is that you are not allowed to exist. That is not a figure of speech. It is the actual working rule of your employment. You may be present in a room, you may be needed in a room, but you may not be seen to exist in it. If the king passes you in a corridor, you press yourself against the wall, you turn your face to the panelling, and you become furniture. If a great lady enters the chamber you are cleaning, you do not leave. Leaving would draw attention. You simply stop being a person. You lower your eyes. You still your hands. You wait, holding a chamber pot that is still warm, until she has finished her conversation and drifted away, and then you resume breathing. You learned this rule on your 3rd day when you failed it. You'd been carrying a copper jug of hot water up the service stairs. The little stairs, the ones squeezed between the walls like veins inside a body. And you came out through the hidden door into a corridor at the exact moment the Comtesse du Barry swept past with 2 of her women. And you looked at her, just for a second. Just long enough to see that the most scandalous woman in France, the king's mistress, the woman preachers thundered about from Paris pulpits, had a small spot of rouge smudged below her left eye, and looked, up close, tired. She didn't notice you, she never would have, but the under-governor of the corridor noticed you, and that evening a man named Monsieur Gervais took you into the linen room, closed the door, and explained with his hand gripping the back of your neck that a boy who looks at the great ones is a boy who sees things, and a boy who sees things is a boy who talks, and a boy who talks does not remain at Versailles. He does not remain anywhere. He goes back to Normandy without a character, without a reference, without a future, and his family, who are counting his wages, who wrote him a letter last month asking whether he might send 4 livres more because the cow died. His family starves a little more slowly than he does. Then Monsieur Gervais let go of your neck, straightened your collar with 2 fingers, almost gently, and said the sentence you will hear 100 times in this place, the sentence that is the true motto of Versailles, truer than anything carved in gold over the gates. You have no eyes, you have no ears, you have only hands. You have thought about that sentence every day since. You're thinking about it right now, tonight in the dark, because tonight is the night this whole story turns, though you don't know it yet. Tonight is the 26th of April in the year 1774, and somewhere below you, 4 floors down, under painted ceilings where gods and goddesses tumble through clouds, the King of France has just come back from the Petit Trianon with a headache and a fever, and the doctors are telling each other quietly in Latin that it is probably nothing. It is not nothing. In 14 days that man will be dead, and you will be one of the people who has to deal with what smallpox leaves behind, and you will learn exactly what kind of secrets a servant takes to his grave. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back a few hours to the beginning of an ordinary day, because you can't understand what it meant to keep the secrets of Versailles until you understand what it cost in the body just to live there. Your eyes open to darkness, and for half a second you have forgotten where you are. Then it hits you. The smell. It's not one smell. It's layers, pressed down on top of each other like the strata in a quarry wall. Closest is the smell of the straw in your mattress, which has gone sour with damp because the lead roof above you sweats in the cold hours before dawn and drips, one slow drop at a time, into the corner of the attic. Beneath that is the smell of the other 5 bodies in this room. 5 other boys and men in blue livery coats hung on nails, 5 sets of feet, 5 heads of hair greased with pomade because powder must sit on something. Beneath that, tallow, the stub of last night's candle, drowned in its own fat. Beneath that, drifting up through 4 floors of the most magnificent building in Europe, the smell of the palace itself, cold ash, old urine, boiled meat, sewage from the courtyard drains, orange blossom from the potted trees they carry indoors in winter, and the strange, flat, mineral smell of marble that never gets warm. And beneath all of it, you, your own body, which has not been fully washed since the Feast of St. Joseph, more than a month ago. You've stopped noticing your own smell, mostly. Everyone here has. Welcome to the Palace of Versailles. It is little after 5 in the morning, in the last week of April, 1774, and you are lying under the roof of the north wing in a space that the architects never intended for human beings. Your name is Etienne Meunier. You're 17 years old. You came here 2 years ago from a village near Caen, in Normandy, with a letter of recommendation from your parish priest, 1 spare shirt, and a piece of your mother's cheese wrapped in a cloth, which you made last 4 days because you could not bear for it to be gone. Your father is a tenant farmer. Your uncle, your mother's brother, spent 30 years as a groom in the stables of a marquis, and it was his letter, passed hand to hand up a chain of servants and cousins of servants, that got you this: a position as a garçon of the King's Interior Service, a boy of the blue livery, one of the lowest of the several hundred human beings whose entire purpose is to keep one man, one aging, tired, frightened man, clean, fed, warm, and magnificent. Back home, everyone said Versailles would make your fortune. They said a boy who serves the king eats the king's bread and sleeps under the king's roof and cannot fail to rise. They weren't wrong exactly. You do eat the king's bread. You do sleep under the king's roof. What nobody mentioned is that the king's roof leaks onto your face, and that you would go weeks at a time without seeing daylight for more than an hour, because your entire working life happens inside walls, literally inside them, in the servant passages and back stairs threaded through the building like tunnels through a cliff. You lie still for a moment longer, listening. The palace is never silent. Even now, in the black hour before dawn, you can hear it working. Somewhere below, a shutter bangs. Water is being pumped. You can feel the faint rhythmic shudder of it in the timbers, the great machine at Marley pushing river water uphill through miles of pipe so that a fountain can perform for 30 seconds if the king happens to glance out a window. A cart is grinding across the cobbles of the service courtyard, iron tyres on stone, bringing the day's first bread from the town. 600 loaves before breakfast. A dog is barking down in the kennels, and beneath everything, so constant you only hear it when you listen for it, the low mutter of a building where 10,000 people live, coughing, snoring, a baby crying somewhere in the townside attics where the families are, a door closing, a door closing, a door closing. Your bedmate, a 15-year-old boy named Colin from the Auvergne, is snoring against your shoulder blade with his knees jammed into the backs of yours. Yes, you share a bed. Everyone at your level shares a bed. Privacy is for people with names that appear in documents. Colin talks in his sleep, in his mountain dialect, and he grinds his teeth, but he doesn't steal. And in this attic that makes him a treasure. You have perhaps 10 minutes before Michaud comes up the ladder stair and starts pulling blankets off bodies. You use them the way you always do. You take inventory of yourself. Your hands first, because your hands are your livelihood. You flex them in the dark. The knuckles are swollen and they crack when you make a fist. 2 years of cold water, hot copper, lye soap and beeswax have aged them 20 years ahead of the rest of you. There's a burn across the heel of your right palm, half healed, from a warming pan 3 weeks ago. It split again yesterday and wept, and you dressed it with a smear of tallow stolen from a candle end, which is what everyone does. The skin at the sides of your thumbnails is cracked in deep, dry lines that catch on wool and sting when the lye finds them. Your fingertips are so calloused that you can pick up a candlestick that would blister a gentleman. Your feet ache in a dull, permanent way that no longer counts as pain. You once tried to count it, somewhere between 15 and 20 miles yesterday, all of it indoors. Most of it on stone, a great deal of it on stairs, much of it carrying weight, water jugs, wood baskets, linens, chamber pots, chocolate services, a footstool, a small dog belonging to a duchess who wanted it conveyed to her carriage without its paws touching the ground. Your back is 17 years old and feels 40, and your stomach is empty and knows exactly how long it will remain empty, and has learned not to complain about it mostly. The bells of the parish church of Notre Dame down in the town begin to ring for early mass, thin and far away through the leads. And then, much closer, a sharper sound. The ladder stair creaking and Michaud's voice, hoarse with sleep and tobacco, saying what he says every single morning of your life. Up. The king doesn't wait. The king, in fact, will not be awake for another 3 hours, and when he wakes it will be to a ceremony so elaborate it takes 90 minutes and 100 people to get one man out of bed. But that is precisely the point. For the king to rise like a god at 8, 500 people must rise like animals at 5. You are the tide that goes out in the dark so the ship can float at noon. You sit up. The cold comes through your shirt instantly. The attic is never warm, even in April, because the lead above you drinks the heat of the night sky. Your breath doesn't quite steam, but nearly. You swing your feet down onto floorboards gritty with dust and old plaster, and the boards are cold in a way that goes straight up through your heels into your teeth. Beside the door there's a bucket of water that was warm when someone carried it up last night, and is now 1 degree off ice. You splash your face. The shock of it makes your burns sing. You rub your teeth with a finger and a pinch of soot from the candle dish, spit into the slop pail and reach for your livery. The coat is royal blue, faced with red, trimmed with a narrow silver-white lace, and it is the single most valuable thing you have ever worn. It doesn't belong to you. Nothing you wear belongs to you. It belongs to the wardrobe, is issued, inspected and inventoried, and if you tear it, the cost comes out of wages you have mostly already promised to your mother. You handle it the way a priest handles vestments. You know its weight without thinking. Heavy wool, close to 4 pounds, and you know every weak seam, and you know that the left cuff button hangs by 3 threads, that you keep meaning to fix and keep being too tired to fix. You dress in the dark by feel. Shirt, breeches, stockings darned at both heels with wool that doesn't match. The coat, the shoes with their pinchbeck buckles polished to look like silver from a distance, because at Versailles everything is polished to look like something better from a distance. Colin is up now too, whimpering at the cold, and the other 4, and the 6 of you go down the ladder stair one after another in stockinged silence, with your shoes in your hands. Because directly below this attic sleeps a gentleman usher who has already had 1 boy dismissed for waking him, and the whole world, your entire fate, everyone's fate in this building, depends on the sleep and the temper of the person just above you. That is the true architecture of Versailles. Not marble, not mirrors. It is a pyramid of tempers, 10,000 people high, and you live at the bottom of it, holding your shoes. The service stairs take you down through the body of the palace the way a vein runs through meat. They are nothing like the stairs the visitors see. The ambassador's staircase we saw, before they demolished it, was marble and gilt bronze and painted trophies, wide enough for 8 men abreast. Your stairs are 26 inches wide. You know, because you have measured them with your own shoulders, both of which have been bruised on the turns while carrying a loaded tray. They are unlit except where someone has left a tallow stub in a niche, unpainted, and worn into shallow scoops by 2 generations of feet. The walls are close enough that you can steady a heavy jug against them with your elbow, and everyone does, and so the plaster at elbow height is polished black with grease along its whole length, like the neck of an old violin. The temperature changes as you descend. The attic cold gives way to a stale in-between warmth on the bedroom floors, and then, as you come down toward the ground, you hit the working heat rising from below. The flues, the warming kitchens, the laundries, the great hearths that have already been burning for an hour. The smell changes with it. Cold dust becomes smoke, then bread, then, as you pass the level of a certain landing near the prince's wing, the reek of the latrine pits, which are cleaned by contract by men who come at night, and are paid partly in the right to sift what they remove, because things fall into latrines at Versailles. Rings fall. Coins fall. Once, famously, A diamond shoe buckle fell, and the man who found it in the muck sold it back to the losing marquis for 1/10 of its value, and both parties considered it a fair transaction, and this tells you everything you will ever need to know about the economy of this place. At the bottom, in a low room with a stone floor, the day's work is issued. Michaud stands at a table with a list. Michaud is your immediate overboy, a garçon grown grey in service, 50 years old, still called a boy because that is his rank and will be his rank when he dies. He has a face like a dropped boot and hands so scarred by 50 winters of chilblains that the knuckles no longer fully straighten. He can carry 2 full water jugs up 4 flights without setting them down and without any expression at all crossing his face. He is not kind. He is something better than kind. He is exact, and in this building exactness is the only mercy that matters, because everything that goes wrong rolls downhill, and Michaud is a wall that stands halfway down the hill. Meunier, he says without looking up. Fires and water, the small apartments. Then you're lent to the wardrobe for linens, then chamber service. Move. Fires and water. The oldest work there is. Before anyone great can wake, the rooms they will wake into must be warm, and warmth is carried. Everything at Versailles is carried. You take your place in the wood line, and a man swings a canvas sling of split oak and kindling up onto your back. £30, maybe 35, the stick shifting and settling against your spine, the rope of the sling finding with perfect memory the same groove in your right shoulder it found yesterday. On top of that, a fire kit, flint, steel, charcloth, a small bellows worn shiny as a chestnut. In your free hand, a copper water jug that will weigh 20 pounds once it's filled at the cistern tap, and the handle of that jug has, over 2 years, built a ridge of callus across your palm so specific that you could be identified by it, the way a soldier is identified by his musket shoulder. And then you walk. And this is the part nobody who has not done it can imagine, the sheer distance. Versailles, measured through its service corridors, is a small city. From the wood store to the farthest apartment you serve is, by your own count of paces, a bit over 1/4 of a mile, one way, including 5 staircases. You will make that kind of journey, loaded between 15 and 20 times before noon. The first room is an antechamber belonging to a lady of the Comtesse de Provence's household. You come in through the servant door, which is cut into the boiserie so that its seams vanish into the carving. A door designed on the principle that you and everything you do should not appear to happen. The room is empty and blue dark, the shutters still closed. It smells of last night. Cold hearth ash with its faint bitter smell like wet iron, candle smoke, face powder, a chamber pot behind a screen doing what chamber pots do, and under it all the ladies' perfume, jasmine, and something animal beneath the jasmine, because the fashionable scents of this age are built on musk and civet, on glands scraped from cats and deer, and the whole palace, when you learn to smell it honestly, is flowers laid over beasts. You kneel at the hearth. The stone is cold under your knees through your breeches. You rake the ash forward. Softly, softly, ash flies and settles on velvet, and someone notices, and shovel it into your ash bucket, and the fine grey dust coats the cracks of your hands and finds the split in your burn and stings. You lay the kindling in a lattice, the way Michaud taught you your first week. Strike sparks into the charcloth, and lean down and breathe on it, cheek almost against the cold marble, until a coal the size of a pea becomes a flame the size of a thumbnail becomes, with 3 careful sticks and 30 careful seconds, a fire. The first heat of it touches your face like forgiveness. You do not warm yourself at it. It is not your fire. You have never once in 2 years sat beside a fire you built. Water into the basin jug on the washstand. Pot from behind the screen. You carry it at arm's length not because of the smell, which you stopped registering long ago, but because splashing it on the parquet means scrubbing the parquet. Out through the hidden door, down to the slop drain, sluice, rinse, back. Shutters you leave alone. Opening the day is the femme de chambre's privilege, not yours, and privileges here are marked out more jealously than borders between kingdoms. A war was nearly fought, the older servants tell you, over which office had the right to hand the Queen her glass of water. They're not joking. Nobody at Versailles jokes about rights. Then the next room, then the next. Kneel, rake, lay, strike, breathe, flame, water, pot, walk. Your knees learn the floors, marble in the grand rooms, parquet in the apartments, brick and stone in the passages. By the fourth fire, the ash and sweat have made a grey paste in the creases of your palms. By the seventh, the sling rope has worked through the cloth of your coat shoulder and is riding on the bruise directly. And here is the strange thing, the thing you could never explain to your father. All of this brutal, invisible labour takes place inside beauty, so extreme it still stops your breath. You cross, on your 12th trip, the corner of a gallery where the shutters have been opened early, and the sunrise is coming in low and gold, and it strikes the mirrors. The Hall of Mirrors is 240 feet long. 17 arched windows face 17 arched panels of mirror glass. 357 plates of it, made by French craftsmen, because the king's minister lured the secret of mirror-making out of Venice 100 years ago, lured the workmen themselves, and the story the old servants tell in the wood store in the dark is that Venice sent poisoners after its runaway glass-makers, and that some of them died for these walls. You don't know if it's true. You know that when the dawn hits those panels, the whole gallery fills with doubled light, gold on gold, the painted victories of old, King Louis rolling across the ceiling 60 feet up, the crystal chandeliers hanging cold and unlit like frozen fountains, and the parquet stretching away from your worn shoes like a lake of honey. And you stand there for exactly 4 seconds, a boy with an ash bucket in a hall built to humiliate emperors, and something in your chest lifts and hurts at the same time. Then you hear heels on the parquet at the far end, some gentleman crossing early, and you do what you are. You step backward through a mirror. One of the panels is a door. You close yourself into the dark behind the glass, into the smell of dust and old wood, and you stand in the wall of the most famous room in the world, holding your bucket, waiting for the footsteps to pass. There are men and women who lived their entire lives at Versailles, and never once saw it from your side of the mirror. You see it from both sides, every day. That is the first secret, the one under all the others. The palace is hollow. It is a stage set with people living in its thickness, and the people in the thickness of the walls hear everything that is said in front of the mirrors. Everything! By 7:30 you have built 11 fires, carried something over 400 pounds of wood and water in instalments, and eaten nothing. Breakfast, when it comes standing up in the servants' passage outside the wardrobe. A piece of yesterday's bread, dense and good. The king's household bakes proper bread, whatever else it fails at. And a cup of thin wine cut with water. You eat leaning against the wall with your ankles crossed, because there is nowhere to sit, because chairs are for people, and you chew slowly to make it last, and Colin appears beside you with his own bread, and the two of you eat in the comfortable silence of pack animals at the same trough. Then the wardrobe, and Monsieur Gervais. You need to understand Monsieur Gervais, because Monsieur Gervais is the man who's going to teach you, over the coming days, how a kingdom keeps its secrets. He's a valet of the wardrobe, somewhere past 60, narrow as a paper knife, with a face powdered smooth, and eyes the colour of dishwater that miss nothing, ever, anywhere. He has served in this palace for 44 years. He was carrying linens through these corridors when the old king's great-grandfather's furniture was still in some of these rooms. He has dressed, or helped dress, or stood in the room during the dressing of 3 generations of the greatest family on earth. He owns, it is said, a house in the town of Versailles, with 6 rooms and a servant of his own, because a valet of the wardrobe with 44 years of gratuities, perquisites, and discreetly sold candle ends is, by the standards of your village, a wealthy man. The candle thing is real, by the way, and it is worth knowing. Every candle in the king's apartments is replaced daily, whether burned or not, and the barely used candles belong by ancient right to certain servants, who sell them back to the chandlers of the town, and there are men at Versailles who've bought farms with candle ends. Nothing here is wasted except lives. Gervais does not like you. Gervais does not like anyone. But 3 months ago he began to use you, which is different and better, because Gervais uses only people who have proven they can carry a thing from one room to another without looking at it, hearing it, or afterwards remembering it. This morning he hands you a stack of pressed linen, sheets, warm from the ironing room, smelling of hot metal and lavender, heavy as a sleeping child across your 2 arms, and walks you through the passages toward the private apartments, and on the way, quietly, in the flat voice he uses for teaching, he gives you the rules again. He gives you the rules every time. He believes rules evaporate from young heads overnight, and he is right. You will place the linen in the cabinet. You will not remark on anything in the room. If there is a person in the room, there is no person in the room. If there is an object in the room that surprises you, you've never been surprised in your life. If you are spoken to, you answer in 5 words or fewer, and you look at the second button of the coat of the person speaking. Never the face. The face is where people live. You have no business where people live. You say, "Yes, Monsieur Gervais." What did the Maréchal de Mirepoix say to the Duc d'Aiguillon on the Queen's staircase yesterday at 4 o'clock? "I wasn't on the staircase, Monsieur Gervais." "You were 4 feet from them. I saw you." "I wasn't on the staircase, Monsieur Gervais." Something moves at the corner of his powdered mouth. It is not a smile. It is the ghost of the possibility of a smile glimpsed at a great distance in fog. "Good," he says. "You may live." Here is what you have come to understand slowly, the way you learn the pattern of a parquet floor by scrubbing it. The entire palace runs on this discipline, and the discipline exists because the entire palace is made of glass. Not the windows, the people. Everyone at Versailles is watching everyone all the time because watching is the local industry. A courtier's career is made or ended by who nodded to whom at the chapel door, who was invited into the carriage, who was seen coming out of whose apartment at what hour and in what state of dress. The ambassadors of Europe pay good silver for gossip. The Paris police pay for it too. There are men in this palace, men in livery like yours, who write weekly reports to the Lieutenant General of Police on everything they hear, and everyone knows there are such men, and no one knows which men they are. Perhaps Michaud, perhaps Colin, perhaps the boy who sleeps on your other side. You do not think about it. Thinking about it is a road with nothing good at the end of it, and in the middle of this web of 10,000 spiders sit the servants, who are the only people who see the truth, because the truth happens in bedrooms, at close stool and wash basin, at 3 in the morning, in the moments when the great take off the great performance along with their coats, and the only witnesses to those moments are people who officially do not exist. You have already at 17 seen things that could end careers. You have carried a chocolate service at 7 in the morning into the apartment of a married lady of the household and set it as instructed for 2, and made no inference from the sword belt hanging on the chair, because you do not make inferences. You have no eyes. You have scrubbed rouge off a linen collar that belonged to a churchman. You have found, while sweeping the floor of a card-room at dawn, an EOU for 11,000 livres. More money than your father will touch in his lifetime. More money than your entire village handles in a decade. Crumpled and thrown into the cold hearth by a young count who had lost it at faro in the time it takes you to build 4 fires. You smoothed it, looked at the number until the number stopped meaning anything, and handed it to the room's usher, who handed it up, and you never heard of it again. 11,000 livres. Your wages are 100 livres a year, with bread, bed, and livery. You did the arithmetic against your will, standing there in the ashes. The paper in your hand was 110 years of your life, thrown into a fireplace, missing the fire, and you've learned the deepest household secret of all, the one that isn't scandal, the one that is just true. The great ones are bodies. That's all. That's the whole secret. Under the silk they itch, they smell, they bleed, they are afraid. The most beautiful woman at court has flea bites dressed with powder. The proudest duke in France weeps in his sleep. You know, because you have stood in his antechamber at night with a candle, waiting to be rung for, listening to it through the door and studying the second button of the darkness. Versailles is a machine for making certain human bodies look like gods, and the servants are the mechanics, and no mechanic has ever believed in the god, because the mechanic has held the god's chamber pot. You believe in the machine, though, you have to. The machine feeds your mother. Meunier, Gervais' voice, flat as you reach the cabinet door. This afternoon you will attend in the king's antechambers with the wood service. There is a press of duties. Half the ordinary boys are down with spring fevers. You almost drop the linen. The king's antechambers. You have served in 100 rooms, but the king's own apartments are another country, staffed by another race. The boys of the chamber proper, sons of servants of servants of servants, positions bought and inherited like farms. For a north wing garçon to carry wood, there is like a parish priest being asked to hold a candle at high mass in Rome. The king, Gervais adds, in exactly the same voice a man would use to say the weather has turned, is unwell. He came back from Trianon last night in the Duc de Noailles' carriage. When a king travels in another man's carriage, the world should pay attention. The world will not. You will carry wood, and you will have no eyes. He looks at you for a moment with his dishwater stare, and then he says something he has never said before, something with an actual human being audible somewhere far down inside it. And wash your hands before you go up, with soap, twice. You don't understand the instruction. You will, within a week, understand it perfectly, and for the rest of your life you will wonder whether Gervais knew, that first morning, from the very first morning, whether 44 years in the walls of this house had taught him to smell what was coming, because what was coming was the smallpox, and it was already inside the King of France. Before we climb to the king's rooms, you need to know the man who lies in them, because the whole weight of what follows hangs on who he was. Louis XV, 64 years old, King of France for 59 of those years, crowned at 5, a small grave boy in ermine that outweighed him. the last living heir of a dynasty that death had gone through like a scythe. His great-grandfather, the Sun King, outlived his own son and his grandson, and very nearly everyone, so the crown skipped 3 generations and landed on this child, and all of France fell in love with him. They called him the Beloved, Louis le Bien-Aimé. When he fell sick at Metz in 1744, they say all Paris wept in the churches. 6,000 masses were bought for his recovery in the cathedral alone. That was 30 years ago. Nobody buys masses for him now. You have seen him. Of course you have seen him. Everyone has seen him. That is the whole point of Versailles. The King of France lives his life in public the way a saint's relics live in a glass case. Any man decently dressed, any man who can rent a sword at the gate, and you can, there are stalls in town that rent swords to sightseers the way stalls rent umbrellas, can walk into the state apartments on the right days and watch the King of France eat his dinner. It is called the Grand Couvert, and it is one of the strangest things human beings have ever done, and you have stood against the wall during it with a wood basket. So let me show it to you, because you cannot understand this world without it. A table set for 1, sometimes 2, in a room the size of your village church. Around the table, standing, in order of rank so precise that men have petitioned the king over which of them stands 6 inches closer. The great officers, the courtiers, and behind them a slow shuffling river of the public, filing past to watch a man eat soup. The food comes from kitchens so far away, across a street, through a courtyard, up a stair, that a procession of officers escorts it, and armed guards, and everyone it passes must bow to it, must bow to the dinner, men sweeping their hats off to a tureen, because the tureen is going to the king and carries his glory the way a wire carries heat. By the time it reaches the table, it is lukewarm at best. The King of France has eaten lukewarm food his entire life, in front of an audience since the age of 5. When he wants a boiled egg, it becomes a performance. He was famous for taking the top off an egg with a single stroke of his fork, and people came from Paris on Sundays to watch it, and vendors in the town sold pamphlets about his table manners. Think about that. Think about being that man. You are 17 and invisible, and you have come to understand, carrying wood along the back of that room, watching between bodies, that the king is the only person at Versailles more watched than a servant, and the only one who can never, ever, not once in 60 years, go through a hidden door and stand in the dark and be nobody. Except that he tried. That is the story of his whole reign told in architecture. Behind the state apartments over the years he built himself a warren, the Petits apartments, small rooms, low ceilings, up private stairs, a workshop where he turns wood on a lathe with his own hands quite well, kitchens where he brews his own coffee, which no one is allowed to do for him, the only labour in France reserved to the king, rooms full of maps and clocks, a library that smells of leather and him, and beyond the gardens, the Petit Trianon, a jewel-box house his mistress talked him into, where the etiquette is turned off like a fountain, where he can pour a lady's wine himself without 4 officers dying of shock. Half the servants judge him for it, the old ones especially, Michaud especially. A king who hides, Michaud says, unpicks his own crown thread by thread. The Sun King understood that a king is a king every waking minute or he is nothing. This one wants to be a private gentleman 5 days a week and a god on Sundays, and Michaud says you cannot store divinity in a cupboard and take it out when wanted. It goes stale. And there is the other matter, the one preached against in Paris, the mistresses. There have been many. There is now one, the last one, the famous one, Jeanne, Comtesse du Barry. And here you must be honest the way servants are honest, in the low rooms, among yourselves, because you know things about her that the pamphlets don't. The pamphlets say she was a whore off the Paris streets, sold upward man by man until she reached the throne. The pamphlets are more or less right, and the entire nobility of France has had to bow to her, and duchesses have left court rather than yield her precedence. And the late Queen's daughters, the King's own middle-aged pious daughters, call her the creature. But the servants, who see her at 7 in the morning unpainted when the chocolate goes in, the servants mostly do not hate her. She remembers names. She tips in gold carelessly, hugely. A boy who carries her muff from carriage to door can be handed a louis d'or, a month's wages for 30 seconds' work. She once saw a scullery girl weeping over a smashed service and, instead of having her charged for it, paid for it herself and told her own femme de chambre to say the cat did it. You know this story is true because the scullery girl told it to Colin, and Colin cannot lie. His face is glass. She's kind, the creature. Kindness at Versailles is so rare that when the servants find it, they pass it from hand to hand in the dark like contraband. And she is the reason the priests have the king in a vice. And this vice, remember it, because it will close around a deathbed within the fortnight, works like this. The king keeps a mistress, and therefore lives in mortal sin, and therefore cannot receive absolution or the sacraments, unless he casts her off, publicly. And the King of France cannot die without the sacraments. Not privately cannot, constitutionally cannot. The most Christian king, dying unshriven, is a catastrophe of state, an obscenity, unthinkable. So the whole machinery of his soul has a lever sticking out of it, and everyone at court knows exactly where the lever is, and the priest's party and the mistress's party have been circling it for years, waiting, as it turns out, for a fever. All of this, the beloved who is no longer loved, the God who hides in cupboards, the woman the kingdom hates, and the servants quietly don't, the lever waiting in the machinery. All of this is lying in the great state bed behind the gilded balustrade when you come up the back stairs at 2 in the afternoon on the 27th of April 1774, with a basket of split oak on your back into the low hidden passage behind the king's inner rooms, and smell for the first time the particular smell of the end of a world. It doesn't smell like the end of a world yet. It smells like a sickroom, burnt vinegar, which they steam over lamps against bad air, wax, broth, the flat animal smell of sweated linen. The passage is crowded, bodies pressed to the walls as physicians come and go through the real doors on the other side of the panelling, and you hear them, the physicians, because the panels are thin and you're 3 feet away, invisible with wood on your back. There are 14 physicians and surgeons and apothecaries in attendance by the end of that week. 14. They bleed him once and argue, and bleed him again. You hear the words, la saignée, and the clink of the basin, and you know the sound of blood going into a basin now, a sound you will never unhear, heavier than water, softer than wine. And they debate a third bleeding, and someone says through the panelling, in a voice grey with fear, that a third bleeding is what was done at Metz, and to bleed a king 3 times is to announce that he is dying, and the announcement itself has consequences, sacramental consequences. Do you understand, monsieur? Once we say it, we cannot unsay it. And then, on the evening of the second day, Someone brings a candle close to the king's face to help him drink, and there is a silence on the other side of the panelling, a silence with a very specific shape. And then a voice says, quite quietly, 3 words. You are pressed in the dark against the back of the boiserie with 30 pounds of oak cutting into your shoulder, and through the thin painted wood of the most gorgeous room in Europe, you hear a physician of the faculty say, "It is smallpox." And the passage around you, the dark, crowded, invisible world inside the walls, the world that officially does not exist, goes absolutely still. Because every man and boy standing in that passage has just done the same arithmetic in the same second, and it is not about the king at all. Almost none of the great ones in the outer rooms have had it. Inoculation is new, foreign, half forbidden. The church distrusts it. The old court never risked it. But the servants are villagers. Smallpox goes through villages the way fire goes through thatch, and it either kills you as a child or signs you and lets you go. Half the faces in the passage around you are pocked. Michaud's face. Chevet's face, under the powder, you realise it now, you had never let yourself look, is faintly cratered along the jaw, like old moonlit ground. Your face is smooth, you have never had it. In the dark, a hand closes on your arm. Michaud. He has read your smooth face in one glance of a tallow stub, the way he reads everything. Not you, he says very low. You don't go past this door again. Wood stops at the passage. You hand it through. And from 3 feet away, mild and flat through the darkness, comes the voice of Monsieur Gervais, who has had it, whose face paid for it 50 years ago, and who is therefore, by the black arithmetic of this disease, one of the safest men in France. The boy will do as he's told, and the boy will remember, a pause, the length of a heartbeat, that from tonight this house is going to be full of people who were never in the rooms they were in, and never saw the things they saw. He has been in training for this his whole service, so have we all. That is the moment you finally understand what your employment has been about all along. 2 years of learning to have no eyes. They were teaching you how to attend the death of a king. But a palace does not stop for a dying man, not even when the dying man is the reason the palace exists. That is the second thing those days taught you, and it is stranger than the first. 10,000 people still had to eat. 600 loaves still came up from the bakehouses before dawn. The fountains were still tested. The floors were still waxed on your hands and knees with a brush strapped to one foot, skating the wax in slow figure eights across parquet, the length of a field, while your palms went shiny and your kneecaps turned to wood. Down in the great stables, 2,000 horses were still fed and groomed. The clocks were still wound. There is a man whose entire office is winding the king's clocks, and he wound them every day of the dying, because a stopped clock in a royal apartment is an omen no one dared allow. So while history gathered in one bedroom, you lived the other 23 hours of each day in the body of the machine, and I want to take you through that body now, down and down, because the fever above makes everything below more vivid, the way a candle burns brighter in a draught. Go down with your empty jugs, at the end of the second day to the level below the ground floor, and further, along a vaulted corridor where the walls sweat and the air thickens with heat and noise, toward the kitchens of the Grand Commune. The Grand Commune is a building most visitors never notice, a huge square block across the street from the palace, and it is the stomach of Versailles. Kitchens, larders, roasting rooms, pastry rooms, and above them floor after floor of lodgings for the 1,500 people who staff them. The heat reaches you 30 yards before the doorway, and then the sound. a sound like a battle fought with copper. 40 cooks and their boys in a hall under black beams, 5 hearths going at once, spits the length of a man turning under whole lambs, the fat dropping and cracking in the trays with a sound like slow applause, the smell so dense and layered it is almost a food itself, roasting meat, burnt sugar, wine reducing, tallow, sweat, scorched feathers where a boy is singeing plucked fowl over a flame. You know a girl here. Everyone at your level knows someone in the kitchens the way sailors know someone in the galley. It is the difference between hunger and comfort. Her name is Madeleine. She is 19. She comes from 2 villages over from yours in Normandy. You found each other by accent across a corridor, like 2 birds of the same species in a foreign forest. And she works in the fruitery, and her hands are worse than yours. You didn't think anyone's hands could be worse than yours. Hers are scalded pink to the wrist, always from sugar work. She candies fruit and pulls sugar into flowers for table pieces, and pulled sugar is worked hot. Just barely cool enough not to blister, except that judgment fails sometimes at hour 14 of a working day, and so her fingertips are glazed with old burn scar, smooth and slightly shiny, and she can no longer feel fine textures with them. She told you once, matter-of-factly over a shared heel of bread, that she can't feel her rosary properly anymore. She says the beads all feel the same now. She says it the way you'd mention a lost button. She feeds you. This is the underground economy again, the one that keeps everyone alive. By ancient right, the leavings of the great tables belong to the serving officers, who sell what they can't eat. There are respectable citizens of the town of Versailles who dine every evening at a set price, on food cooked for the king's table and merely not eaten by it. It is called the sourdough trade, and it is entirely legal, and it means the king's suppers feed the king last and 100 strangers afterward. What trickles below the sourdough, the broken and unsellable, a collapsed pastry, the heel of a ham, sauce wiped from a dish with bread, trickles by friendship. Madeleine passes you, in a cloth, a broken sugar swan, an actual swan formed of sugar, its neck snapped in transit from a table piece celebrating you have no idea what. You eat pieces of it walking back through the vaulted dark with your jugs, and the sweetness is so violent, so far beyond anything your mouth was raised on, that your eyes sting. Sugar is wealth. You're eating a smashed piece of wealth in a tunnel, and 4 floors above you the physicians are steaming vinegar over lamps around the man all this sugar is for. Is it true? Madeleine asks you at the door in Norman dialect very quietly, because dialect is the servant's cipher, and even so she barely voices it. The Petit Trianon? Everyone knows. That is the thing about the walls being hollow. The court was told a fever, a rash. They use soft words for days. The fishwives in the town market knew it was smallpox before some of the dukes did, because the town is staffed by the palace, and the palace has no secrets from its own bloodstream, only from the world. I have no eyes, you say, and she looks at you, and her scalded hand closes around your wrist for 1 second. Hard, and that is a whole conversation, and then the fruitery door swallows her. You go back up. The palace at night, that week, is a thing you will see behind your eyelids for the rest of your life. Candles are power at Versailles. Light is rank. A duchess's apartment blazes. A clerk gets 2 tallow dips. But that week the balance of light in the building tilted. The state rooms went dim, hushed, half abandoned, because the court was afraid of the air, and the chapel blazed. The blessed sacrament exposed, tapers in banks, relays of priests, the deep grain of chanted psalms coming down the marble at 2 in the morning to where you stood in a doorway with your wood, and the courtiers coming and going from the chapel, not in their day silks, but wrapped dark, like conspirators, praying in shifts for a man most of them privately wished dead. And would you like to know how a 17-year-old woodboy could possibly know what dukes privately wished? Because dukes do not lower their voices for furniture. Because you stood against walls that week holding baskets, while men of the highest blood in France discussed, in your hearing, at arm's length, in ordinary conversational tones, what offices might fall vacant, which party the new young king would favour, whether the creature would be gone by Friday and who would get her apartments. Her apartments, you understand. The man was still alive, 60 feet away, and they were dividing his mistress's rooms. One of them, a beautiful cold-faced man whose name you will keep out of even this, said, glancing at the state bedchamber doors delicately, the way one nods toward a privy, said, "Kings are like the sun, they warm you or they burn you, but either way one plants by the seasons." And the man beside him laughed softly into his handkerchief, and neither of them saw you 4 feet away, because there was nothing there to see. You have no eyes. But eyes, as it turns out, were never the danger. You have ears, whatever Gervais says, and a memory. And that week your memory became a locked room that would stay locked for 60 years, and it is only being opened now, tonight, for you, listener, because every soul in it is long past harm. That is what the title of this story means, by the way. The secrets the servants of Versailles took to their graves were not mostly the scandals. The scandals leaked. Scandals always leak. There were pamphlets in Paris that knew the colour of the du Barry's bed hangings. No. What the servants took to their graves was this other thing, the heavier thing, the knowledge of exactly how small the great ones were in the moments that decided everything, who trembled, who haggled, who laughed into a handkerchief, who was brave, some were brave, wait and see, and who, wearing the grandest names in Christendom, thought first, fastest, and only of themselves. The pamphlets guessed at bodies in beds. The servants knew the state of souls, and they kept it, because their bread depended on keeping it, and because, this is the part that took you years to understand about Michaud, about Gervais, about yourself, because keeping it was the one aristocracy open to them. Any fool can talk. The men in the walls knew everything and said nothing, and in their silence they were, in the only way available to them, grander than the dukes. You climb the black service stair with your last load near midnight, and through the panel at the top you hear the king's voice. You have never heard it so close. It is asking. Low, blurred with fever, human, entirely human, the voice of a sick old farmer, the voice of your own grandfather in his last winter. It is asking what time it is, and the clockwinder's clock answers before any person can. Small and silver in the dark, midnight, and you stand in the wall with your wood, and above your head, all over the vast sleeping building, thousands of clocks that one man winds are striking midnight together, faint and layered and endless, and somewhere in the middle of them the beloved lies burning in the most famous bed on earth, asking the hour. You hand the wood through. You wash your hands with soap twice. 13 days left. The days that follow settle into a rhythm that is like nothing you have known, because it is the ordinary rhythm of your labour with the second heartbeat underneath it, irregular and getting louder. You still rise at 5 into the cold and the smell of sour straw. You still build fires, more fires than ever, because the sick room devours heat. 'cause the physicians have ordered warmth kept even, and the nights are still sharp, and because fear itself seems to make the great ones cold. Apartments that used to take one basket now ring for two. You still carry water, and now also vinegar, gallons of it, up from the stores, the sharp reek of it soaking into your coat sleeves, until Colin says you smell like a pickled herring, and you tell him he smells like the inside of a shoe, and the two of you laugh in the stairwell, briefly, stupidly, 17 and 15 in the middle of the end of a reign, because bodies that young cannot hold dread steadily. It keeps slipping out of your hands like a wet jug, and you keep picking it back up. The sick room itself you never enter. You are the last link of a chain that stops at a door. But a door at Versailles is a membrane, not a wall, and you serve at that membrane 4, 5, 6 times a day, and so you become an expert in the sounds of a king dying. You learn the sound of the bleeding basin, which you already knew. You learn the sound of the king being moved, the pause, the gathering, the count under the breath in Monsieur Dr. Latin, the sliding rush of linen and the low animal groan that etiquette does not cover, that no ceremony in the world can dress, and then the exhausted resettling of a heavy body into hot bedding. You learn that smallpox has a smell. I will not give it to you whole, because you're trying to sleep, but understand it this way. By the 6th day, the vinegar was no longer against infection. The vinegar was against the smell. They burned it over lamps day and night, and juniper too, and still, when the sick-room door opened to pass a basin out, what came through the servant passage was a wave that made grown men who had gutted pigs at home turn their faces to the plaster. The disease was eating him alive on the surface of his own body, in the grandest room in Europe, under a painted ceiling where France herself in gilded stucco watched over the bed with a shield she could not use. And the court, on the other side of that membrane, split into its parts like curdled milk. The daughters stayed. Write that down somewhere in yourself, because it is one of the brave things, and the brave things are rarer and should weigh more. The king's daughters, Adelaide, Victoire, Sophie, middle-aged, unmarried, mocked by the whole glittering machine for 20 years as dowdy pious leftovers, ridiculed in 100 supper-table witticisms you were furniture for. They had never had smallpox, and they knew exactly what that meant, and they walked into that room on the first day, and they did not leave it. They nursed him with their own hands. Princesses of France, who had never in their lives put on their own stockings, held basins and wiped the ruin of their father's face, hour after hour, day after day, breathing that air, taking that chance, while men with swords and battle honours sent their regrets from Paris. The servants' passage, which mocks everyone, stopped mocking them that week and never started again. 50 years later, an old man in Normandy, you, will bristle if anyone in your hearing repeats the old jokes about Mesdames, and on the 4th night the lever moved. You were there. That is the plain fact of it. The fact you will carry. You were in the passage at the turn of the stair with an empty vinegar can when the Comtesse du Barry came through the little door, because the little doors were how she had always come and gone. The hidden stair between her apartments and his rooms was practically her own street. The servants called it her lane, and she came down it for the last time at, you will always believe, around 11 o'clock at night on the 4th of May, and you flattened into the wall, and this time, for the second time in your life, you failed the rule. You looked at her. She was not painted. She was in a dark cloak over a nightdress, and her famous hair was down, and she had been crying so long that the crying itself was over, burned through, leaving that scoured, blank face that you knew from funerals at home, the face of the newly widowed at the church door. 2 women followed her, carrying almost nothing, a case, a bundle. The kingdom's most notorious luxury, leaving with a bundle, because the priests had won. Of course they had won. They held the sacraments, and the sacraments held the king. He was sinking, and he knew what he was, which was mortal, and what he needed, which was absolution, and what absolution cost, which was her. He had sent her away himself. Gently, they said. The femme de chambre who was in the room told the story only once years later, and it reached you down the usual channels. He took her hand and said that he owed it to God and to his people, and that if he had been given back his health it might have been otherwise, and she did not make a scene. She, who had been a scene her entire life. She kissed his ruined hand and went. And as she passed you in the stairwell 3 feet away, invisible boy with a vinegar can, the Comtesse du Barry did something no duke, no minister, no prince of the blood had done in your 2 years of service. She saw you. Her eyes, swollen half shut, found yours in the tallow light, and rested there for 1 full second, and something crossed her face that you've turned over every night since and can only call recognition. 1 watched creature seeing another, 1 person whose position had just ended looking at a person whose position had never begun. And then she was past, down her lane for the last time, out into the courtyard where a carriage stood without arms on its doors, and gone, to a convent first, and then to a small chateau, and then, eventually 20 years further on, to a scaffold in Paris in a revolution nobody in that stairwell could have imagined, where she would die more afraid, and more human, and more pitied by the crowd than almost any of the great heads that fell. But that is another night's story. What matters tonight is this. An hour after her carriage rolled, the mood of the whole building turned like a tide. The lever had been thrown, the way to the sacraments was open, and now the machinery of holy death, the oldest, deepest ceremony this house owned, began to grind into motion, and everyone from the first gentleman of the chamber down to you, down to the boy with the vinegar can, was inside it. On the morning of the 7th of May, the King of France made his confession. It lasted, the passage said, 17 minutes, and the passage timed it, because the passage times everything, and what 59 years of absolute power confesses in 17 minutes is a secret that even the walls did not get. The one door at Versailles with nothing behind it but a priest, an old man, and God. And then they brought him the sacrament in state, and this you saw, this you were part of, because every pair of hands in livery was pressed in to line the route. The blessed sacrament carried up the Queen's staircase under a canopy, from the chapel through the staterooms to the bedchamber at 7 in the morning, through a double hedge of guards and servants and courtiers kneeling on the parquet, 100 candles moving through the half-dark like a slow river of fire, doubled in every mirror, the little bell going before it, ting, 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 and total silence otherwise. Versailles silent, actually silent. The only time in 2 years you ever heard it. 10,000 souls holding still while their God went by, going to their king. You knelt where you were put, wax dripping hot threads over your cracked knuckles, and you watched the canopy pass, and behind it walk the royal family at the distance the physicians allowed, the grandchildren, and you saw the new world walking there and didn't know it. A heavy, shy, blinking boy of 19 who hated crowds, and on his arm an 18-year-old Austrian girl with the most famous face in Europe, and in 11 days those 2 children would be handed the largest kingdom in Christendom the way you'd be handed a loaded tray, and the boy would say, the passage had it by nightfall, everyone had it by nightfall. The boy would say, it feels as if the universe is falling on me. The universe took 11 more days to fall. They were the longest days the palace ever spent, and you spent them carrying wood into the middle of them, and now I am going to slow down, the way the days themselves slowed down, and take you through the last 1 hour by hour. Breathe, settle. We're almost at the centre of the story, and the centre of the story is a candle in a window. But first, one morning of air, because you had one, and you need it the way you needed it then. On the Sunday before the end, Michaud looked at your face at the 5 o'clock muster. Grey, he said later. Grey as dishwater, boy. You looked like something wrung out, and did a thing he had never done. He gave you an errand to the roofs. The plumber's foreman needed a message and a bag of lead nails carried up. And the roofs of Versailles are a country of their own. Acres of lead and slate laid over the top of the palace, like a grey landscape folded out of the sky, with valleys and ridges and lead gutters wide enough to walk in, chimney stacks in forests, the great gilded ornaments of the roofline standing around you suddenly life-size, trophies and urns and crowns of gilded lead that from the ground are jewellery and from up here are monuments, taller than you, their gold leaf scabbing at the edges where the weather works at it. You went up through a hatch above your own attic, out of the smell of vinegar and tallow, into the 5th of May at 6 in the morning. And the world was there. You had forgotten the world. That is the truth about service inside walls. The world becomes a rumour, and then you stand up in a lead gutter 7 stories above the ground, with wind coming straight off the west, clean wind, wind that has crossed nothing but forest and wheat since the sea, and the world is laid out around you to the horizon like a table set for someone much larger than mankind. To the west, the gardens, the parterres in their box hedge embroidery, precise as lace from this height, the Grand Canal lying out through the park, a mile of water in the shape of a cross, catching the early sun so that it looks like a blade laid down flat in the grass. You can see the fountains being tested for a Sunday that will cancel them. Threads of white standing up out of the basins and blowing sideways. You can see the ordered woods with their rides cut through, and past them, where the king's order ends, the real woods, blue with distance, going back toward Normandy, toward home, further than your eyes can use. To the east, at your feet, the town of Versailles, laid out on the palace like piglets on a sow, 3 great avenues raying out from the gates, and around them the tiled roofs of a city of 50,000 that exists for no reason but this building. The swordsmiths and wig makers and sedan chairmen and laundresses and the renters of sightseeing swords. All of it smoke and clatter already at 6 in the morning. All of it feeding on the sick man below your feet. All of it about to learn what you already know. And under your shoes, him. That was the vertigo of it. You stood on the lead directly over the state apartments, and somewhere below your boot soles through timber and gilt and painted heaven, the 14 physicians were beginning another day. And up here there are only pigeons and wind, and the foreman of the plumbers, who took his nails, looked out at the same horizon and said the only epitaph you ever heard a working man give that king while he still lived. He said, "Big place for one bed," and then he sent you back down into it. You want to know what carried you through the last week, and it wasn't courage, and it wasn't loyalty exactly. It was that view. You had seen the size of the machine from outside. 50,000 people in the town, 10,000 in the palace, 2,000 horses, 600 loaves, a canal like a sword and a forest to the horizon, all of it balanced, the whole impossible spinning top of it on the point of one human pulse. When a thing that size is about to fall over, you do not run out from under it. You cannot. You are part of what it is balanced on. You put your shoulder where Michaud tells you, and you hold still. The 9th of May was quiet. The quiet before things break is not calm, it is a tension. The whole palace was one held breath. Courtiers had begun, days before, the ugly beautiful ritual that this house had performed at deathbeds for 100 years. The vigil of the Œil de Bœuf, the antechamber with the oval window, where the great ones gather when a reign is ending and simply wait, hour upon hour in their orders and their diamonds, watching the bedchamber door. But this time the disease kept them further back, and so the waiting spread through the whole state apartment like water-finding levels. Clumps of silk in dim gilded rooms, murmuring, falling silent, murmuring. Every time the sickroom door opened for a basin, 300 heads turned like grass in wind, and by then everyone knew the sign to watch for, and it was not a door and it was not a bell. It was a candle, in a window of the king's apartments, giving on to the marble court. A lit candle stood, day and night now, where every eye in the courtyards below could see it, and the word had gone through palace and town alike, through the walls, through the market, the way everything went. While the candle burns, the king lives. They will put it out when it is over. The order was practical. A signal agreed so that the stables and the couriers and the machinery of succession could move on the instant without waiting for word to walk down staircases. But nobody who stood in those courtyards ever forgot the theology of it. 64 years of the beloved, 5 decades of absolute monarchy, wars, treaties, mistresses, Mets and the weeping cathedrals, all of it burned down at the end to a physical candle in a physical window, one flame doing what flames do, and half a town below it, checking, checking, checking. You checked. Everyone checked. Crossing the marble court on the morning of the 10th of May with a can of vinegar, you checked without meaning to, the way your tongue finds a broken tooth, and it burned small and steady and almost invisible against the bright overcast. And you went in and up the black stairs and handed the vinegar through, and the hand that took it, one of the chamber boys, a boy your own age, pocked and safe, grey with sleeplessness, who had been in that air for 2 weeks. The hand that took it was shaking, and he said through the gap in a whisper with cracks in it, "It's today, the prayers for the dying." They started the prayers, and you stood in the dark passage and you heard it begin through the panelling, the sound that the church has made at bedsides for 1,000 years and will make at yours. The low two-sided tide of the litanies, priest and answer, name after name after name of every saint in heaven being called, one by one, to come to the door and stand ready. And along the passage in the dark, the livery went down. That is what you remember. No order was given. The boys and the old men in the walls of Versailles, the invisible people, knelt down one after another on the bare boards in the dark among their jugs and baskets, and answered the litany under their breath. Ora pro eo, ora pro eo. Pray for him, pray for him. The men who carried his water and his wood as his waste, praying him over the border on their knees inside the walls, while 30 feet away through the gilding the greatest names in France stood in the outer light with their faces arranged doing their arithmetic. You knelt with them. Your knees knew the boards. Your mouth knew the words. Your mother had knelt you through the litanies for your grandfather in a room that smelled of tallow just like this one, and it occurred to you, 17 years old, in the wall of the Palace of Versailles, that this is what Gervais' sentence had been missing all along, the sentence about eyes and ears and hands. In the end, nobody has anything but hands. The king had had the most eyes and ears of any man alive, an entire kingdom of them. And here at the finish they were no use to him, and what was carrying him now was hands. His daughter's scalded hands, the chamber boy's shaken hands, the priest's raised hand, your own cracked pair, folded in the dark. At 3:15 in the afternoon, on the 10th of May, 1774, the litany on the far side of the panelling stopped. There was a silence of a certain length. You will never be able to say how long. Time in that passage had stopped being made of minutes, and then, out in the light, in the staterooms, there began a sound that no one who heard it ever managed to describe to anyone who hadn't, though many tried, and I will try now, for you, because you were in the wall and heard it come. A sound like a wave, like a gust, like... The best any of them did was thunder, a strange low rolling thunder indoors, and it was footsteps. It was the entire court, hundreds upon hundreds of human beings in heeled shoes on parquet, turning as one body and running. Running. Courtiers running. A thing as unthinkable as the chapel dancing. Running out of the apartments of the dead king, down the hall of mirrors, the whole quarter-mile of staterooms roaring with heels like a cavalry charge over a wooden bridge, running to find the new one, to be first. First to kneel, first to be seen kneeling, first to say Vive le Roi to a 19-year-old boy standing with his girl wife in a doorway with, witnesses swore for the rest of their lives, tears running down both their faces and the ceiling of their universe coming down on them. In the window on the marble court, a servant of the chamber leaned over and pinched out the candle. You were not in the courtyard to see it go out. You were in the wall on your knees in the dark, 3 feet from the body of Louis the Beloved, listening to the rain end overhead like weather. And then Michaud's hand was on your shoulder, and Michaud's voice said the truest sentence anyone said at Versailles that day. The sentence that was the other half of everything, the servant's half. Up, boy. The dead don't bury themselves, and nobody else is going to touch this one. Michaud was right, and this is the part of the story that no painting was ever made of, the part that belongs entirely to the people in the walls. Understand what should have happened. There was a ceremony for the death of a king of France, ancient and enormous. The body was to lie in state. The heart and entrails were to be removed by the surgeons and coffered separately, sent with escorts to separate churches, as had been done for his ancestors for centuries. The corpse embalmed, dressed, displayed. The whole realm processed past it, and then the slow black river of the funeral flowing the 10 leagues to the Abbey of Saint-Denis, where the kings of France had been laid down, one after another, for over 1,000 years. None of it could happen. The body made it impossible. The surgeons refused. Let me say that again, because it is the sentence around which this whole night turns. The surgeons of the King of France refused to open the King of France. The disease had done what the 12th day of confluent smallpox does, and the physicians, 14 of them, men who had bled him and dosed him and breathed his air for a fortnight, looked at what remained on that bed and declared that to embalm it would kill the embalmers. One of them is supposed to have said that he would perform the operation if a certain courtier, who was loudly insisting on the ancient forms, would agree to hold the basin. And the courtier discovered urgent business elsewhere, and the ancient forms died in that room quietly of the same disease as their master. So there would be no line in state, no heart in a silver case, no slow black river. There would be instead the following, and you were part of it, and you swore an oath about it, and you are breaking that oath tonight at a distance of 250 years, which is, you have decided, enough. The body had to go into its coffins, lead inside oak, fast, sealed, and in secret, and someone's hands had to do it. Not the great officers, whose privilege it theoretically was. Privilege, you learned that night, evaporates in the presence of certain smells. Hands from the walls, the old pocked hands, Michaud's hands, Gervais' hands, 60 years old, a rich man by your standards, a man with a house in town who could have pleaded his rank in the wardrobe and stayed away, standing at the foot of that bed at midnight with his sleeves rolled, directing, because he had served this man for 44 years, since before your father was born, and he would not let strangers do it badly. A dozen others, chamber servants and wardrobe men, all of them signed by the disease in childhood and so ransomed from it. And at the door of the room, in the passage, forbidden one step further because of your smooth face, you did not touch him. Michaud's word held, not you stayed, not you. What you did, all that endless night of the 10th and 11th of May, was serve the threshold. You brought what they called for and took what they passed out. You brought spirits of wine and quicklime in a leather sack that hung on your shoulder like a body itself, and aromatics by the armful, juniper, camphor, whole crushed sacks of herbs, and the long strips of waxed cloth. And you took away, can by can, cloth by cloth, wrapped and weighted, everything that had been part of the sickroom, everything, the hangings, the coverings, all of it condemned, down the black stairs by tallow light to the burning place in the far service yard where a pit fire ate the furnishings of the grandest bedchamber in Europe at 2 a.m, silk damask woven with the royal cipher curling and flaring blue-green from the dyes, gold fringe actual gold spitting, while the man tending the fire, one of the latrine contractors, the lowest of the low, the only trade with a stomach for the work, leaned on his rake and watched a duke's ransom go up in smoke that smelled of vinegar and juniper and the other thing, and said to you conversationally across the flames, "Sang Dieu, boy, I've buried plague years thee made less fuss," and you had no answer, and he expected none, and the gold fringe spat. Through the panel, through that whole night, you heard the work. You heard men who did not speak. That was the mark of how bad it was. The passage, which time confessions and price scandals, which talked through everything, worked that night in a silence broken only by the sounds of the labour itself. The creak of the bed frame taking shifted weight, the slosh of spirits of wine, once a sound of a man stepping quickly to the window, and the long pauses while he stood there, and then his steps coming back. And near the end, toward 4, the sounds that you will keep to yourself even now, even tonight, the sounds of a very heavy, very fragile burden being moved by many hands the shortest possible distance, and Gervais' flat old voice counting the lift, deucement, deucement, gently, gently, the same voice, exactly the same voice that had taught you to carry linen. They poured in the quicklime and the aromatics around him. They sealed the lead with solder. You smelled it through the panel, hot metal and rosin, a tinker's smell, a smell from market day at home, unbearably ordinary. And they closed the oak over the lead, and the King of France was inside 3 fingers of wood and metal, in a room stripped to its gilded bones. and the men came out through the servant door one by one into the passage where you stood, and you saw their faces by tallow light. And I will describe only one, because it is the one you saw for the rest of your life whenever anyone spoke the word Versailles. Gervais came out last. His coat was off, his shirt was grey to the elbows, and the powder was gone from his face, sweated through, wiped away, who knows? And for the first time in your service you saw the whole geography of the old smallpox scarring plainly, the cratered jaw, the pitted temples, the face the disease had signed 50 years before, as if reserving him, keeping him for this one night's work. He stopped in front of you. He smelled of spirits of wine and juniper and solder. His dishwater eyes found yours, and he did not say you have no eyes. What he said in the flat teaching voice, with the door of that room shut behind him, was, "Now you have something worth being silent about." And then, 2 nights later, the drive to Saint-Denis, and this is the last picture, the one the crowd saw, the one that even made it into the histories, though the histories got it from the roadside and you got it from the courtyard. They took him out at night, deliberately, quickly, at 8:30 in the evening on the 12th of May, with the whole thing organised like a military movement, because the court was already gone. The new king and the whole glittering machine had rolled away to another palace within hours of the candle going out, fleeing the infected building, leaving it to the servants and the body. And think about that. Spare one moment of this night to think about that. For 2 days, Versailles, the seat of the world, belonged to no one but the dead man and the people who carried his water. The emptiest the great house ever was. Your footsteps in the Hall of Mirrors had echoes. Then the courtyard, torches, and the hunting berlin, not the great funeral car of the old ceremonies, a big plain fast carriage, and the coffin lashed inside it, and a small escort of guards and pages, and the order given quietly, and the whole convoy went out the gates at a pace just short of indecent, and swung onto the road for Saint-Denis, choosing the route around Paris, not through it, because Paris could not be trusted with this coffin, and the convoy knew it, and here is why. The people lined the road anyway. Word travels faster than any berlin. And the people of the villages, standing in the torchlit dark to watch the beloved go by for the last time, did not kneel and weep as their grandparents had wept for the false alarm at Metz. What witnesses heard, and what the histories confirm, and what a page who was there told a groom, who told the stables, who told the kitchens, who told you within the week, was this. As the carriage passed at that hurrying trot, the crowds along the road called out the cry of the hunt. "Tie out! Tie out!" Tally-ho, tally-ho, the halloo the old king had loved better than anything on earth, hooted after his coffin in the dark by his own people, mockery and requiem in a single word, a whole reign judged at a canter. And the carriage did not slow, and the guards looked straight ahead, and somewhere near the walls of Paris a thunderstorm broke over the convoy, and the King of France came to Saint-Denis after midnight in the rain, with his escort soaked to the skin, and they took him down into the crypt among 1,000 years of his ancestors, with a haste his great-grandfather would not have permitted a village priest. And it was done. 59 years, gone into the ground in under 3 days, carried the whole way, from the bed to the lead, from the lead to the oak, from the oak to the berlin, by hands whose names appear in no history. You stood in the marble court and watched the torches go out the gate. Beside you, Colin was crying, without noise, without knowing it, the way 15 cries. On your other side, Michaud stood with his ruined hands hanging and his dropped boot face unreadable, watching the last light turn onto the avenue. And when it was gone, he said to the darkness, in the voice of a man closing a ledger, "Well, he kept us fed." Which was, when you turned it over in the attic that night, the most honest funeral oration delivered for Louis XV anywhere in France, and the only one the speaker had earned the right to give. 2 days, I said, when the palace belonged to no one but the dead man and the people who carried his water. Let me give you 1 hour of those 2 days, because you never told anyone, and it deserves telling once. It was the evening between the sealing and the convoy, and there was for the first time in your 2 years of service nothing to carry. The condemned furnishings were ash. The vinegar can stood empty. The court was 40 miles away, learning the shape of its new sun, and the orders had simply stopped, the way rain stops, and 20-odd exhausted people in blue stood around the service courtyard at dusk, not knowing what to do with their hands. So you walked. You are not sure to this day why. You went up the black stairs out of habit, and then, at the top, instead of turning into the passage, you pushed open one of the little doors and stepped out of the wall, into the state apartments, into the open, into the forbidden side of the mirror, because there was no one left to be invisible for. And you walked the whole enfilade of the great rooms alone, in the last light, in your work shirt, with lye burns on your hands. The salon of Hercules empty, the painted ceiling dimming overhead like a sky actually going out. The salon of Apollo, where the throne stood on its dais under its canopy, and no guard, no usher, nothing between you and it but 30 feet of parquet you yourself had waxed on your knees, and you stood and looked at the throne of France for as long as you wanted, minutes, whole minutes, and it looked back at nothing, and it was smaller than the pulpit in your village church. And then the Hall of Mirrors, all 240 feet of it, with the sun going down straight along its axis the way the old architects had aimed it, so that the light came in level and red and filled the 17 arches and doubled itself in the 357 plates of glass, and you walked down the middle of that burning corridor entirely alone, your worn shoes loud as hooves in the silence, one 17-year-old wood boy processing through the axis of the world, with no one to bow to and no one to bow to him. Halfway down, you stopped. You stood in the exact centre of the gallery. You could feel the centre, the way you can feel the middle of a plank bending, and you turned slowly, all the way around, once, and let yourself, for the only time in your service, look at everything, openly, greedily, with eyes. And here's the secret you found there, the one you took to Normandy, the one you're handing across 2.5 centuries tonight. It was built for this, not for the crowds, not even for the kings. A room like that is aimed past its owners at something else, at the light, at the after, at whoever would one day stand in it alone and be equal to it simply by being the only heart beating there. The dukes never saw that gallery. They saw each other in it. You, that evening, with the ash of the royal bed hanging still under your fingernails, were perhaps the first person in 100 years to see the room itself, and it was worth seeing, and you stood there while the red light climbed the mirrors and went out, and then you went back through the little door into the wall, into the dark where you belonged, and closed it softly behind you, and went down to find some bread. Colin was in the wood store, and Madeleine had come across from the Grand Commune with half a loaf and a rind of cheese, and a story that the kitchens were roasting nothing, for the first time in living memory, the spit standing still, the 40 cooks sitting in the cold hall drinking the sauce wine, and the 3 of you 8 sitting on the chopping block, with your shoulders touching, in the empty palace of the kings of France, and it was, you understood even then, one of the suppers of your life. Not for the food, for the strange holiday stillness, the held breath between rains, the feeling of sitting in the pause between two beats of an enormous heart. Colin fell asleep against the wall mid-sentence, 15 years old and finished, and Madeline looked at him, and then at you, and neither of you said anything, and her scalded hand found your cracked one on the chopping block in the dark, and that was the actual beginning of the rest of your life, there, in the wood store, in the interregnum, among the kindling. The heart resumed. Hearts do. The oath came the morning after the convoy. It was not a grand oath. Nobody put a Bible under your hand. It happened in the linen room, the same linen room where Gervase had once gripped your neck, and it happened to about 20 of you at once, everyone who had served the threshold or the burning yard, and it was administered not by a priest or an officer, but by the First Valley's deputy, a smooth man in black, who explained, pleasantly, the way the truly dangerous always explain, that the late king's illness had been a fever, that the arrangements had been performed with every traditional honour, that persons found spreading morbid or indecent tales concerning the late king's person would be understood to be slandering the crown itself, and the crown, in its mercy, had places for slanderers, and the places had no windows. Then he had each of you say, out loud, one after another, I saw nothing contrary to the honour of the king, and he watched each mouth as it said it, and he wrote nothing down, because men like that never need to. You said it. Everyone said it. And here is the strange truth you discovered in the saying. The oath was almost unnecessary, not because of fear, because of something older than fear, something the deputy in black, who was management, could not have understood. Michaud put it into words that evening in the wood store when Colin, still shaky, asked in a whisper why the crowds on the road had been allowed to hoot, and yet 20 servants had to swear silence about a smell. Michaud thought about it for a long time, splitting kindling, the hatchet going down slow and exact. Then he said, the road saw a king pass. We saw a man die. The road can say what it likes about kings. What we saw belongs to him. Crack. You don't sell a man's last hours, boy. Not because they'll hang you, because it's his. Crack. It's the only thing we ever handled in this house that was actually his. That is the secret of the secrets, listener. That is what the title means, all the way down. When those men and women went to their graves silent, and they did. Historians 2 centuries on are still fitting together the last fortnight of Louis XV from fragments, because the people 3 feet away wrote nothing. It was not only terror and not only bread. It was the last service. The great ones had taken everything from the people in the walls, their days, their nights, their knees, their hands, their names. Silence was the one thing the servants had left to give, and so they gave it the way poor people give, completely, and it turned out to be the only gift the dead could still use. And then, because the world is the world, life resumed, and it resumed as work. The palace had to be purged. The new court would return, not soon. The new king kept away for months while the building aired. But it would return, and it must return to no trace. So the summer of 1774 was for you the great scouring, the strangest, hardest, most secretly satisfying labour of your service. Whole apartments stripped to the plaster, floors that you had waxed in figure eights now scrubbed with vinegar and lye until the vinegar finally left your dreams by moving permanently into your hands. Walls washed, regilded, repainted. The smell of fresh oil, paint and size, chasing the smell of the sick room out of the state floor room week by week, like an army retaking ground. You worked stripped to your shirt in the July heat with your sleeves rolled and lye burning in the cracks of your knuckles, and Madeline, when you met her on Sundays now, it was Sundays now it had become, without either of you saying anything Sundays, Madeline would turn your hands over in her scalded ones, palm up, and inspect them like a farrier, and shake her head, and say that between the two of you there was maybe one whole working pair. The seasons went over the roofs. You know how this goes now. You have lived a year of this house with me before tonight's story ever started. The gardens burned yellow in August, and the fountains ran for no one. The autumn came in from the west with rain that found the same corner of your attic it always found. The new court came back with the cold, a 19-year-old king who wound clocks and forged little locks with his own hands, a king with a workshop, another one, the hiding had gotten into the blood of that family, and his Austrian queen, who filled the staterooms with a new noise, younger, faster, more dancing in it, and the whole vast machine spun up again around new bodies as if it had never stopped, because the machine was the only immortal thing on the premises. 600 loaves, 2,000 horses, the clockman on his rounds, fires and water, fires and water. You rose. Slowly, the only way your kind rose, a step a year, like water working through stone. The scouring summer had marked you out. Gervais' word had weight, and Gervais, who retired at last in the new reign to his 6 rooms in town, spent a little of that weight on you without ever saying so, in the way of a man settling accounts before leaving. You became a garçon of the chamber's outer service, then a proper valet's assistant. Then, by the time your beard came in fully, a wardrobe man yourself, with boys under you to whom you said, you heard it coming out of your own mouth one morning and had to lean against the linen shelves. You have no eyes, you have no ears, you have only hands. You married Madeleine in the church of Notre Dame in the town, in the spring of 1778, in your blue livery, with Colin as witness, grinning, 18 by then and tall as a door. Michaud came. He stood at the back the way he stood everywhere, like a man on duty, and afterward he gave you a wedding gift of a hatchet, a good one, forged in the town, a tool, because Michaud's love spoke tool, and told Madeleine, with a face of perfect gravity, that she was taking on a boy who couldn't split kindling straight in 1772 and had needed 6 years of the king's patience to learn. It was the only joke you ever heard him make. He died the next winter, in the attic he'd slept in for 40 years. Quietly, between the 5 o'clock bell and Colin coming to wake him, and the palace did not pause, because the palace never paused, and 20 of you carried him to the parish ground on your shoulders through the falling snow, past the gates of the greatest house on earth, which did not notice, and you thought, here is another one going into the ground full of 60 years of what he saw. The richest graveyard in France is not at Saint-Denis. It is the parish plot at Versailles, where the servants lie, every coffin packed with everything the mirrors ever reflected. You stayed 15 years more. You saw the Queen's diamonds and the Queen's slanders. You saw the American war eat the treasury. You saw the bread riot's first far-off weather. And in October of 1789 you stood in the marble court, a 42-year-old wardrobe man with grey at his temples, and watched a crowd of thousands from Paris, soaked, starving, furious, take the royal family away down the Paris road in an afternoon, and the great machine stopped, just like that, The fires went out because no one rang for them. The 600 loaves stopped coming. The clockman wound the clocks for a while out of habit, out of love, and then he stopped too, and the palace of Versailles fell silent around a skeleton staff of caretakers, and the silence you had heard once for one holy morning in 1774 moved in for good. You and Madeline went home to Normandy in 1790 with your savings sewn into her hems, and you bought, with candle-end money, with gratuity money, with 20 years of tips from ladies whose secrets you kept, you bought a small farm 2 villages from where you were born with an orchard, and you never told your neighbours more than that you'd been in service near Paris. Through everything that came after, and everything came after. You were 50 when they beheaded the shy boy who wound clocks, and 50 when the news reached your village about the old Comtesse who had once, on a stairway, seen you through all of it. When the talk in the tavern turned hot, and men demanded stories of the tyrant's palace, its orgies and its monsters, you would look into your cider and say it was mostly carrying water, and let them be disappointed, and keep under your tongue, like a coin sewn into a hem, the candle, the litany in the walls, the doucement, and the creature's ruined eyes finding yours in the dark. You have no eyes. You have no ears. You kept it all anyway, every drop. And now you are old, and it is winter. And this is where I stop telling you what happened and start walking you home to bed, because you have earned it. You've been 17 and 42 and 70 tonight. You've carried wood up 5 staircases and a king down 1. And the last stretch of any story on this channel belongs not to history but to sleep. So come down from the story the way you used to come down from the roofs, slowly, hand by hand, into warmth. It is a January night in Normandy, somewhere past the turn of the new century. You are old now, past 70, which for a man who carried what you carried is a boast, and you are sitting by your own fire, in your own chair, in the farmhouse kitchen. And this is the wealth you actually ended with, the wealth that was the point all along. It is your fire. You built it tonight with your own hands in your own hearth, and then you sat down beside it, which took you 50 years of your life to be allowed to do, and no one in this house will ever ring a bell at you again. Madeleine is across from you with her mending in her lap and her eyes closed, not asleep, just resting them, the way she says. Her scalded fingertips never came back. She still can't feel her rosary, still counts the beads by moving her lips instead. But her hands can judge the heat of sugar to the degree without touching it. To this day, and every fair day in the village, her candied apples sell out by noon, and the children call her la dame au sucre, and have no idea, none, that those hands once pulled sugar swans for the table of the King of France. She never told them. Of course she never told them. You married inside the Guild of Silence. Colin writes twice a year from Paris, where he weathered everything. The revolution, the terror, the wars. The way Colin weathered all things by being impossible to dislike. He serves now as maître d'hôtel to a banker, and his letters are cheerful and misspelled and always end the same way. With the old attic joke, mind the drip, Etienne, and every time you read it you're 15 and 17 again in the cold under the lead. 2 boys with their whole strange lives ahead of them, listening to the palace mutter in the dark. And the palace itself. The reports that reach you say it stands empty still, stripped, sold off, echoing. They say the new government keeps it, unsure what a republic does with a thing like that. They say weeds stand in the marble court where you watch the torches go out the gate. You find you cannot make yourself picture it. In you the house is always full. In you it is always 5 in the morning there, Always 600 loaves coming up from the town, always the smell of cold ash and orange blossom, always 10,000 souls breathing in the dark above and below and beside one another, the whole impossible hive of it, alive. Because here is what remains at the end of 20 years inside the walls of Versailles. Not the mirrors. The mirrors you can barely summon anymore. Gold blurs in memory faster than you'd think. What stays? What is in your hands and your knees and the backs of your eyes tonight, and will be until they lay you down in the parish ground full, like Michaud, like all of them, is small, and it is heavy, and it is this. The exact weight of a full water jug at the top of the 5th staircase. The scoop worn into a stone step, fitting your foot in the dark like a hand. The sound of blood in a basin. The heat of a new flame on your face in a cold room at 6 in the morning. The little forgiveness. The fire that was never yours. A broken sugar swan eaten in a tunnel. The litany coming through painted wood, ora pro eo, and 20 invisible men going down on their knees among the jugs. Doucement, doucement. A candle in a window, burning, and then a window, dark, and a tired woman on a hidden stair, the most hated woman in France, seeing you, of all the creatures on this earth, seeing you for one whole second before the dark took her lane. That is a life. That is what a life comes down to, and it is not a small thing. It only weighs like one. The king's got Saint-Denis and the histories. You got the actual texture of the world, the grain of it, the temperature of it, the weight of it in the hands. And tonight, old man, sitting by your own fire with your wife's breathing across the hearth, you would not trade. You've done the arithmetic one last time the way you did it over the Count's IOU in the ashes, and it comes out your way. It comes out your way. The fire settles. A log drops into its own embers with a soft crush, and a spray of sparks that fly up the black throat of the chimney, and the light in the kitchen shifts, and Madeleine, without opening her eyes, says, "Bed, old man," the way she has said it for 30 years, and you say, "In a minute," the way you have said it for 30 years, and neither of you moves, and that too is wealth. Outside, the wind is coming over the orchard from the west, from the sea, the same clean wind you met once on the leads 7 stories above a dying king, and it presses on the shutters, and the shutters hold, because you rehung them yourself in the autumn, and the house is tight, and the animals are in, and the bread for tomorrow is under its cloth on the shelf, made with your own wheat, and no one anywhere is waiting for you to carry anything. Do you feel that? Stay with that for a moment. No one is waiting for you to carry anything. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a roof that does not drip, a fire that is yours, a woman whose breathing you know better than your own, and hands that have done everything hands can do, and are now allowed at last to lie open on your knees, palms up, cracked and ridged and finished, like tools cleaned and hung up at the end of the season. That's more than the beloved had at the end, in the grandest bed on earth. That's enough. It's enough. It's enough. And now, because I promised to walk you home, let me tell you one more small true thing about that palace. A bedtime thing, and then we will put the lights out together. In all those years inside the walls, you learned every kind of sleep there is. You learned the sleep of the exhausted young, which is less like sleeping than like being struck. You would put your head down on the sour straw at 11, and the 5 o'clock bell would arrive, as far as your body could testify, 4 seconds later. You learned the standing half-sleep of the night attendant, dozing upright in an antechamber with a candle, one thread of you still awake and listening for a bell, the way a dog sleeps with one ear. You learn the stolen sleep of the afternoon, 10 minutes in the linen room among the warm pressed sheets with the smell of hot iron and lavender, the sweetest 10 minutes God ever minted. And you learned, in the bad fortnight, the sleep that will not come at all, the ceiling staring sleep, the vinegar sleep. But the sleep you remember best, the one you would explain to your grandchildren if the Guild of Silence allowed, is this one, the sleep of the whole house. Because there was an hour, you knew it well, the fires and water boys owned it, an hour somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning when even Versailles slept. The last card game had broken up. The first bakers had not yet lit their ovens. The night watch stood still in the long galleries, and the candles were down to their last inch. And for that 1 hour, the greatest and busiest building in the world simply breathed. 10,000 people, from the king in his gilded bed under painted heaven to the boy in the dripping attic, all of them down, all of them dreaming, layered floor upon floor like sleepers in the hold of one enormous ship. The Duchess and the scullion, the priest and the mistress, the clock winder and the latrine man, the daughters and the doctors and the guards, every rank and hatred and ambition in France, unconscious together, harmless together, equal for 1 hour in the only republic that has ever really worked. You used to stand in the service stair in that hour sometimes, on your way down to start the fires, and just listen to it. The whole hive breathing, and you understood, 17 years old in the dark without words for it, what you have words for now. Sleep is the secret that everyone keeps together. It is the one time the performance stops. No etiquette survives it. No rank performs it better than any other. The Sun King himself could not do it more magnificently than his boot boy, and it does every single one of us, every night, the same kindness, and asks nothing. So take it now. It is being offered to you, the same offer, the very same, that was made every night to a boy under the Leads 250 years ago. Let the day be over. It is over anyway. You might as well agree to it. Let the jugs be set down. Let the baskets be set down. Whatever you carried today, and you carried things today, everyone does, weights that don't show, set them down at the foot of the stairs. They will keep. Nothing you are holding is so important that it cannot stand in the dark till morning. The palace taught you that. Everything waits. Even kings wait in the end for hands to come and carry them. Let your own hands go loose. Feel them wherever they are lying, on the blanket under the pillow, and let them open, palms soft, tools cleaned and hung up. They worked. They're done. Let your feet stop walking. They have walked their 15 miles today, one way or another, on whatever floors your life is made of. The stairs are behind you. The last door is closed. Let your shoulders come down from around your ears. There, like a sling being lifted off. 30 pounds gone. Let the fire settle. Let the light go amber, then ember, then just a breathing red in the dark, the way a hearth dies politely, keeping a little warmth back for the morning without being asked. Let the house grow quiet around you, whatever house it is. Listen. It has its own small nighttime language, a tick of cooling wood, a pipe, the wind trying the shutters and finding them tight, and none of it needs you. The house is on duty now. You're relieved. The sounds are getting further away. Or you are. It doesn't matter which. Somewhere, It is always that hour between 3 and 4. Somewhere the whole ship is breathing. The great and the small, the remembered and the forgotten, everyone who ever built a fire for someone else at 6 in the morning, everyone who ever kept a secret out of love or bread or stubbornness, everyone who ever lay down tired in a narrow bed at the top of a great cold building full of other people's gold. They are all asleep in the same dark you are entering now, and it holds all of them, and it will hold you. Centuries pass. They passed while I was talking. The palace you walk tonight still stands. The mirrors you slipped behind still hang, 357 of them, and tourists from countries that did not exist walk that gallery every day and photograph the gold, and not 1 in 10,000 ever notices the seams of the little doors in the panelling. The stairs you climbed are still inside the walls, dark and narrow, with the scoops still worn in the stone, and the grease of dead men's elbows still deep in the plaster, and guides with electric torches led small groups through them now, and voices drop in those passages without anyone telling them to. The state bed stands remade behind its gilded rail. The window that held the candle looks out on the marble court, and the court is swept, and the candle is not there, and nobody who stands in that room is ever told exactly where it stood, and now you know something the guides don't. The kings are gone. The servants are gone. The secrets went with them, down into the parish ground, the fullest graveyard in France. All but the ones I've given you tonight, and you may keep those. You've shown you can carry things, and people still do what people did. They still rise in the dark so that others can rise in the light. They still carry water one way or another. They still keep each other's secrets, the good ones, the ones that are really just tenderness with its mouth shut. They still work their hands raw at things nobody sees and love somebody across a fire and say in a minute and not move. Some things don't change. The tired body doesn't change. The need, at the end of the long day, to lie down and be no one, the servant's privilege, the one luxury the kings never had, that doesn't change either. So take your privilege. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took Etienne under the leads, the way it took Michaud between 2 bells, the way it takes the whole breathing house between 3 and 4. Let the world fade. Let the noise quiet. Let your thoughts slow and soften, and finally stop. You have no duties. You have no bells. You have only rest. The candle in the window is burning low now. Watch it if you like from very far away, getting smaller, getting warmer, a single steady point in the great dark building of the night. We'll put it out together. There, good night.